Hi everyone. Welcome here to the Scorebuddy webinar. We have some exciting content and some excellent speakers here planned for everyone today. Starting off, I'm going to pass you over to my colleague Lara, who has some insights on our audience here today. Before we'll then take some introductions from our speakers. Thank you, Lara.
Thanks, Gavin. Before we get started, you're all very welcome again to our Scorebuddy webinar 2024 update, how to manage the quality of customer care in financial services. Before we start, you might like to see where our audience is tuning in from today. So we have 31% of viewers from the US and 26% from the UK. We also have 5% from Ireland, 6% from Canada, and 6% from South Africa, and the rest is made up from locations all around the world. Industry-wise, we have 48% from financial services, we have 9% from tech, 7% from healthcare, 8% from retail, and 3% from outsourcers. And I'll pass you back to Gavin again, and he will introduce all our speakers for today's webinar.
Thanks for that, Lara. Looks like we have quite a bit of coverage there for you attendees from across the globe, and as expected, heavily industry focused on FS side. So passing over to some of our experts that were brought for you here today. I'll start with Amit. Amit, if you want to introduce yourself to everyone.
Hi everyone, my name is Amit Rao. I'm an Associate Director at Mazar. I work in our financial services consulting arm based in our London office.
Awesome. Thanks, Amit. And Sarah?
Hi everyone, my name's Sarah Awabia. So I work with Amit in our risk consulting team, and we both specialise in financial services. And just quickly, we're really glad to be partnering with Scorebuddy today. For those of you that don't know Mazars, we are a leading international advisory, audit and tax firm. We operate in 95 countries worldwide, including all of the ones on your list, Gavin, which is fantastic.
Happy days. That's wonderful here. Thanks for that, Sarah. And Curtis.
Good morning, everybody from the US. I'm Curtis Kirshner. I'm the Senior Director of Customer Success for the Savings Group. I handle a bunch of customer care related items as well as our QA arm for our financial services.
Thanks for that, Curtis. So some excellent speakers for you guys today, and we have some excellent topics to cover. Before we jump into topic number one, and we will for each topic have a poll running in the background, so please feel free to contribute on that, and we'll check in on the poll at the very end. To start topic one, so topic one we have for today is about creating a vulnerable customer framework. So how to do that, and how much value it can bring a financial services business and having a vulnerable customer framework in place. We're starting to see it's becoming more and more of a standard practice now, especially kind of our side in kind of UK and Ireland. But ultimately, this is something that's equally as transferable globally. So we have starting off with Amit, who's going to bring you through what a vulnerable customer framework is and exactly some of the challenges with that.
Thanks, Gavin. So actually, I'm going to start by giving a little bit more colour to what we talk about or what we mean when we talk about vulnerable customers. So in the UK, we have the FCA, the Financial Conduct Regulator, and they've undertaken significant research and developed good practices for firms to use when dealing with vulnerable customers. Now, these practices can be adopted by all firms, not just those that offer financial services. The FCA's definition of a vulnerable customer is someone who, due to their personal circumstances, is especially susceptible to harm, particularly when a firm is not acting with appropriate levels of care. Now, the FCA conducted a detailed survey back in 2020, which showed that in February of 2020, 46% of UK adults, which works out to about 24.1 million people, had characteristics of vulnerability. By July of 2020, that had increased to 53% of UK adults, and that was due to the pandemic at the time. Now, given the vast number of people that have characteristics of vulnerability, firms that don't have any consideration for managing vulnerable customers risk isolating themselves from a significant potential customer base. And in the case of the UK, that's over half of the UK population, certainly Certainly it was back in 2020. So vulnerability is not necessarily permanent. It can be brief, it can be situational, and anyone can be vulnerable at any time. So there's a few examples of characteristics of vulnerability that I'll talk you through. The first is an individual suffering from illness or injuries, those that are suffering from stress or anxiety, people with physical disabilities, people with hearing and vision impairment, those with cognitive or neurological differences, people suffering from or dealing with learning difficulties, those with linguistic problems, and also age-related vulnerabilities. I'm now going to hand you over to my colleague Sarah, who's going to talk a little bit more about what a vulnerable customer framework should look like.
Thanks, Amit. So as you heard from Amit, a large part of the population may be considered vulnerable at any one point in time. So therefore, it's really important to make sure that you have a vulnerable customer framework in place to make sure that the outcomes for those customers are as good as the outcomes for all of your other customers. So this can be a challenge, particularly as the population demonstrating characteristics of vulnerability is not fixed, and customers will move in and out of that category over time. So over the past few years, we've been working with our clients, and we've found there are really 6 key factors that should be considered when you develop a vulnerable customer framework. And the first one is really about firms really understanding your customers' needs. And this would include the nature and the scale of the characteristics of vulnerability that are likely to exist in your target markets and customer bases. And then it's also important to understand the impact that that vulnerability has on the needs of your customers in your target market and customer base. And you can do this by thinking about the types of harm or disadvantage that your customers might be vulnerable to, and how this might affect the customer experience and outcomes. And then the next factor for firms to consider is around skills and capability. So I'm sure, as you all appreciate, that all of the relevant staff within your organisations need to understand how their role affects the fair treatment of vulnerable customers. And to do that, you need to make sure that your frontline staff have the necessary skills and capability to recognise and respond to a range of characteristics of vulnerability. And then thirdly, monitoring and evaluation are also important. So what we've found is that firms need to have good processes in place to learn the lessons from cases where the needs of vulnerable customers have not been met. And to do this effectively, you need to have good management information available to you relating to the delivery and performance of your products and services, so that you can use that to monitor the outcomes delivered for vulnerable customers. And then product design is up next. So it's important to consider the needs of vulnerable customers at all stages of the product and service design. And this is really to make sure that you can put in place processes to actively reduce the risk of harm for vulnerable customers as they go through their customer journey with you. And then customer service is the next factor to consider. So you need to have good systems and processes in place that support the delivery of good customer services and support, and support to enable vulnerable customers to disclose their needs to you. This is not always an easy thing to do, and it's also important for you to be able to retrieve that information on a customer's vulnerability and needs quickly, so that those customers are not forced to repeat information unnecessarily, because that can further damage the experience and outcome for that customer. So it's important to be proactive in spotting the signs of vulnerability. And then your customer service needs to be able to respond flexibly, and make sure that you are able to let those customers know about the support that's available to them, including options such as third-party representation and specialist support services that might be available to them. And then lastly, by no means least, you should ensure that your communications and information that you're providing your customers about products and services are understood by all customers across your target market and customer base. And that can mean thinking carefully about how you communicate with vulnerable customer groups by taking into consideration their needs. And ideally, firms would offer multiple communication channels so that vulnerable customers can select the solution that best suits their needs. So those, in a nutshell, are the 6 kind of key factors that we think about when we're looking at vulnerable customer frameworks.
Thanks for that, Sarah. Some really interesting insights there, and I know kind of a lot of these kind of practices have been put in place more commonly in the UK now, and we're starting to see them being more and more issued as best practice now globally. But yeah, these are skills that are transferable now, just in the FS market in kind of the global industry. So yeah, some really good insights there, and thanks so much for sharing. I did actually mention as well, I forgot to mention before, guys, we will address questions at the end, so please feel free throughout for our speakers or on any topic to post questions in the chat. We do have some time at the end saved for kind of question time. Probably an opportune time there to wrap up topic 1 and check in on the poll and see what insights we've got here from the audience. I don't know if you can bring the poll up, Lara, can you?
Real quick, while we're looking at the poll, curious to know how you're identifying vulnerable customers and how you're utilizing the Scorebuddy QA system to support it.
Yes, so in terms of from our perspective, I know Sarah and Amit would have limited touch points with the Scorebuddy system, but from our perspective, Curtis, we actually use quite a few methods in terms of identifying vulnerable customers, one of which is AI, which we're going to talk to a little bit later. But additionally, we can have separate kind of segues and scorecards for vulnerable customers when applicable. But in terms of the identification process, a lot of it comes down to scanning and analyzing the interactions that are being had between the customers and the agents, and finding potential vulnerable customers through that data.
Excellent, thank you.
Very good question. So yeah, checking in on the poll, I suppose in terms of the insights we're getting here, like it's kind of what we're expecting to see. I think all 4 of these are really relevant, no matter what way we look at it. Like in terms of how we identify vulnerable customers and implementing tailored solutions for communication strategies. Staff training is important, because obviously in this kind of ever-changing landscape, and especially when we're starting to do this as best practice going forward, staff training can be pivotal. And as we just alluded to, they're developing kind of robust monitoring to be able to identify these areas, which we do plan on talking about a little bit later. So that moves us nicely to topic number 2, which is ensuring customer care as we expand our product offering. So I suppose from a more kind of QA perspective, and kind of right more in our wheelhouse here in Scorebuddy, we kind of talk quite regularly to our customers about when they're expanding their customer offering, how do they manage their QA process? Is it best practice potentially to have the bones of a QA management solution in place as you expand, or kind of grow as you expand into a QA practice? So Curtis, this is actually a really relevant question for you, because I know in the savings group, you guys did experience quite a large number of growth in the last couple of years, and your customer care team had to kind of evolve into that space. So how did you guys manage that kind of excellent customer care as you kind of grew?
Great question, and I can kind of lead into that a little bit and give some framework up front. We started to see growth through so we are an auto refinance company, and we also do purchases and things, and so we saw post-pandemic a growth of just the amount of people that were refinancing loans and purchasing vehicles with, rates being super low in the US and people taking advantage of that. And so we saw this exponential growth across the board through all of our brands. So we have 3 separate brands that we work through: AutoPay, Rate Genius, and Trestle. And there was some situations. So like I said earlier, I handle all of the QA for the savings group as a whole. And so there was a need to shut down sunset our original processes for our escalations process, and then what we were using to do QA, which was all done through Microsoft Access, both programs were done through Access. They were separate from each other, but they were in there. So we worked with a vendor, tried to get a CRM to build out and be able to have a CRM that could incorporate both our escalations group, what we were handling in escalations, and then also that could handle the QA. And so there was the need to find that. And so we partnered up with Scorebuddy at that time. And then we were able to go through and build out the entire process of what we needed to start with, and then clean up how we handle our QA and where it goes. We were able to introduce the Scorebuddy process itself and have the website and everything that you do through that tool. We're able to give live feedback to our LSs. So our loan specialist is who we QA, and so there's legal and compliance aspects to it. There's regulatory needs that we need to hit day in and day out, not only from the financial side, but even like your customer care side. Like everybody should be aware, you have call rules that you have to follow for, you know, certain commissions and like the FCC. And so we needed to make sure that we were compliant on those, not just the financial pieces, but all the other encompassing pieces that are out there. So we were able to start to build out our QA process during that exponential growth at the same time to keep up with that need, to make sure we were catching and engaging in pulling in or pulling data that could be fed back to that sales team live for their sales floor, and then they could be coached and managed effectively. A training is involved in there as well. They're also they get reporting and pull reporting for it that actually allows them to adjust how they're training for new LSs that are coming in, and new regulatory changes or insights that are adjusting within the market, and be able to right now ad hoc work those and adjust for those while we were dealing with this exponential growth. It was a huge milestone. It felt at the time like we were just never going to get there, but with Scorebuddy's help and Scorebuddy's tools, we were able to not only meet but exceed that growth.
That's awesome, Curtis. So, and actually, as you guys expanded, did you have to rework kind of how you were scoring calls and things like that as the expansion happened, or?
Yeah, so that great question there too. So we've adjusted how we were handling calls within the system, and later in this session we can talk about, you know, future enhancements and stuff. I don't want to get into that at this point, but the ability to adjust on the fly and change the process over. So when earlier within this conversation, I was talking about the two business markets that we do. So we do auto refinancing and auto purchases. And then there's a smattering of other small services that we do in there. And you can't have each one may look to be similar from the outsider looking into it if you're not familiar. But once you dive deep into the processes, there are differences within the two. And so we had to adjust how we were QAing and what we are utilizing and scoring on within that. So we were able to build different scorecards based on the interaction the customer was working through, whether it be a refinance or a purchase. And we could do that live, like when we're QAing a call and we're working through that QA, and all of a sudden, our customer says to us, hey, I'm actually purchasing a vehicle, not refinancing a vehicle. We can very quickly within Scorebuddy switch over into that secondary scorecard to make sure we stay within the confines of the legal compliance regulatory pieces that we need to in the financial industry.
That's awesome, and it's really it's awesome that you have such an agile approach to it and can kind of change on the fly. I suppose another kind of key area of this topic as well is, if as a business we're expanding our product offering as well, this actually kind of relates and correlates to what we were talking to before with a vulnerable customer framework. There must be kind of a method of having something in place from a vulnerable customer standpoint, Amit, that we have to maybe keep an eye on when expanding a product offering potentially. Oh, Amit, you're on mute.
Cool. Sorry about that. All right, so yes, when we're working with a firm to help expand their product offering, one of the key outcomes in mind is always the fair treatment of customers, and that includes those customers with characteristics of vulnerability. So we consider some of the similar factors to those that Sarah was speaking about earlier, relative to vulnerable customers, but we can now look at those same factors in the context of expansion of product and service offerings. So Firstly, when designing a new product or service, the firm needs to define its intended target market. So the firm needs to understand the needs of those potential customers within the intended target market to be able to ensure that any new product or service can appropriately meet those needs. It's here that firms should also consider the impact of vulnerability across the intended target market, and firms should seek to map out the end-to-end customer journey. So what does that journey look like for this new product for all customers, including those with characteristics of vulnerability? Firms should also think about defining good outcomes. So what are the good outcomes that they want to deliver to their intended customers? And they should also consider poor outcomes. These are the potential risks of customer detriment. Now, by defining both good and poor outcomes, this allows firms to develop a control framework which is focused on driving those good outcomes to create the optimal customer journey, and also mitigating the risk of detriment relative to those poor outcomes that they've defined.
That makes total sense.
Yeah.
No, sorry.
From a skills and capability perspective, firms need to ensure that relevant staff have training on the features and benefits of any new product or service, so that they're able to provide appropriate support across the customer journey in their role. This is particularly important for employees who may have a role that involves the provision of any type of product-related advice to customers. Obviously, very important when we're talking about financial advice as well. Customer service capabilities should be assessed to ensure that the firm has appropriate bandwidth across all channels to be able to provide adequate levels of support in line with the projected growth relative to any planned expansion. So making sure you have, for example, if you're reliant on a call center, making sure you have enough agents within that call center, and making sure that any automated services or systems are also capable of handling that extra bandwidth that might come with any planned growth. Now, firms will also need to have a communication strategy in place for the launch of any new product or service. So this will likely include marketing materials, which should be clear, fair, not misleading. Communications should be focused towards the intended target market. And the firm should also consider its existing customer base, as any new products or services might well provide better value for customers than those that have been offered in the past. In such circumstances, it would be appropriate for the firm to act in the best interests of the customer and try to move those existing customers onto the new product or service where possible. Now, the last aspect is in terms of, so prior to launch of any new product or service, firms need to ensure that they have appropriate systems and controls through which they can monitor and evaluate the performance of these new products or services. So appropriate MI, appropriate metrics will allow the firm to determine whether or not that product is performing as intended and delivering those good customer outcomes. Relevant MI could be formed of things like complaints data, QA data, as well as data from customer feedback surveys.
Oh, that's awesome. And again, it's two kind of different viewpoints from this topic. Obviously, even you related it back to QA data there at the end of it, but it seems pivotally important to have the vulnerable customer framework in place when viewing to kind of expand product offering. But then, Curtis, you were looking at it from more of even a growth strategy standpoint and more of a QA perspective, and some of the trials and tribulations that you experience when kind of growing and expanding as a business, some of the QA structure that you had to ensure you had in place as you grew and expand. And again, like even how you acted on the fly in a lot of instances, and you're still able to do so as you guys grow. So thanks so much, guys. They're two really interesting points. And yeah, some really good content there. So moving on to topic number 3. So it actually kind of leads us in nicely talking about that to topic number 3. And we actually have another poll for this topic, so please feel free to vote on that. But from your standpoint, Curtis, going back to what you were alluding to earlier about some of the practices you had to put in place initially when kind of not only expanding your product offering, but also getting your QA process in place from day one. Could you talk a little bit more about what you guys were doing originally with your QA process and some of the systems you were using, and potentially kind of how you kind of grew into the framework you're using now?
Yeah, absolutely. I kind of mentioned it earlier a little bit, and I'll go into more detail. So the original process, how we built it out, was all done through Microsoft Access, and it was an antiquated system. And the not only from the QA side of it, so our side when we're doing our QA, we were in an older system through Microsoft that's been around for a long, long time, and it was hand built by one particular individual in the company who knew that system like the back of his hand, and he's a fantastic guy, but just that there wasn't a lot of growth that we were going to be able to do with that system long term when only one individual knew the system as well to build it out. Also within that, when we would build a QA, when we do our score sheet, the score sheet to make those changes relied on a single person in our IT development group to make changes to. So we could adjust it, but it also, there was time constraints with that of how long it was going to get done, what projects and systems needed to be addressed up funnel from me or even within the actual business group itself. So there was precedent that needed to be done there. And you had a single person running all of that. So the system was set very, very strict guidelines, not a lot of branching off there. And then when we were processing, doing each individual QA, so pulling a call from our call systems, reviewing the call, getting it, marking everything, putting our notes in, and getting all that sent out. There was nothing in there that was tying back to our LOS either that could be looked at. It didn't have the ability to add calls to it. And on top of that process, there was, when we were done with it, it just sent an email with the score out to the individual manager of that LS itself, and it was just the score, the full score. There was nothing in there for notes, and there was no way to enhance that system. With us sunsetting that process, we wanted to be able to bring in an entire full stack set tool that we could actually get into line item, change the questions on our end without having to engage outside support through IT, be able to self-manage, be able to go through those processes. And when we're talking, earlier in the conversation, both Amit and Sarah were talking about vulnerable customers. We need to be able to adjust what we're doing on the fly in the event that we have a new lender come on board that wants specific questions asked. We want to be able to add those pieces in, or if there's a certain situation within, again, legal and compliance that is like, hey, we have to start asking this specific question related to, our customers or any kind of vulnerable customers out there that we need to be able to make sure we're marking for. So everybody, in the event of here, we all know what social security number is for the US. That's something we have to be able to ask that question, and we don't ask it in a full stack, like we don't ask it out, but we ask for the last 4 digits to verify the customers we're talking to are actually those customers, to make sure we're not causing vulnerable customers through, identity theft and those types of things. And so that's part of our QA process, and we want to be able to mark those heavily and score on those to where they're a hard compliance fail. Scorebuddy allowed us to do that within the system, to be able to have general questions and then also our legal compliance questions that are highlighted and sent out immediately. On top of that, with the growth that we were going through, with the addition of 2 other brands, adding those on, getting those all done, we needed to be able to rely on ourselves to adjust for that day in and day out. So we have a rotation. We have well over 250 loan specialists across all of our brands. A lot of our staff are remote. We need to be able to adjust and add those staff in as well when we onboard or offboard. And then also from our side for QA, because we do all the QA training and all of that information, I need to be able to add my staff in and move them around as well as needed. And Scorebuddy gives us that ability to do that and be able to adjust things day in and day out if we need to. So if I have to make a change to a scorecard, I can go in there in the evening at 7 o'clock when everybody's offline and go make that adjustment, and it's ready to go the next morning. As well as when you talk about growth and adjustments within the process itself and changing out anything that needs any kind of questions or regulatory requirements. If the FCC comes to us and says, hey, we have to have this in this specific line item in every single, and anytime you're selling a product, you need to be able to verify this information. We can quickly go in and make those adjustments. But even if it's within our own system, so just last week we ran into a situation where we wanted to make sure that we were processing our, when we were selling, or when we were closing our loans, is kind of the industry language there, when we were closing our loans, during that process and that closing call, we wanted to make sure we were very clear between the current obligations of the borrower versus the new obligations of the borrower with a refinance. So we wanted to make sure the borrowers knew that, hey, you're still responsible for your own loan until it's paid off. That is an obligation that you have. And so we wanted to be able to have our QAers identify that, but without engaging outside into the QA process. So we were able to add an internal question into Scorebuddy to make sure when our QAers were hitting that the LSs are saying that, and if they have a line item, if it says no to that, it alerts me directly to say, hey, this was not done. I then know to go in there, pull that one up, listen to the call, get to the timestamp that's put on there to listen it, to see if there's coaching that needs to be done on that. That just happened on Friday of last week, where we made that adjustment. And so far this week, it's paid dividends. So there's an insight into that changing environment that happens day that Scorebuddy allows us to use every single day, even in a minor change like that.
That's actually awesome, because like sometimes when you think about potentially cutting costs in a kind of more efficient QA framework, like you automatically assign a monetary value to it. But it seems like for yourself, Curtis, a lot of it is efficiency gains,
Correct.
in so
Yep.
many different areas, which ultimately helps you guys in your process and helps you guys as a business. So you highlighted so many different areas there where efficiencies were gained. Like one of the areas now that's kind of a hot topic, and we're probably all sick of hearing it, is AI. AI is kind of ever evolving in this space. I suppose that's one thing here in Scorebuddy as well that we're looking into quite extensively, and a lot of our new product offerings to be AI focused because of the efficiency gains it can bring. But I suppose to pass it back to yourself, Amit and Sarah, the kind of there are in this kind of ever-changing AI landscape now where we're looking at efficiency gains. There are some potential pitfalls and things that we should potentially watch out for when looking to use AI to leverage in this space.
Yes, so AI adoption is increasing with the use of predictive AI systems across various functions, including fraud detection, risk modeling, process automation, and for the provision of customer services. So further growth in both customer service and process automation is expected, particularly in conjunction with the adoption of generative AI now. Now, there are many potential benefits relative to the adoption of AI by firms to support the provision of customer service. But yes, as you've alluded to, there are several risks that we've helped our clients navigate. And this can include, first of all, human interaction. Now, this is the most obvious risk, that AI is unlikely to deliver the same type of interaction experience as speaking to an actual person. The AI experience is likely to lack empathy and emotional intelligence that a human agent can provide, and that can particularly be of particular help when dealing with a customer displaying characteristics of vulnerability. The next potential risk, I guess, is that an AI system is only going to be able to manage situations that are contained within the data that is used to train it. So when faced with a situation that's outside of the training data, or where the situation is presented perhaps differently, the AI system may not perform as intended. So this would obviously impact the customer experience and would likely at some point lead to some level of human intervention to be able to resolve the situation. Now, like all technological solutions, AI systems can experience bugs or glitches, which can potentially go unnoticed for some time. There's also the issue of downtime should the system experience a critical failure, and firms that are seeking to adopt AI should consider how that downtime might impact their operations and their customers. AI systems also present data privacy concerns, as systems rely on massive data sets that are typically built on the firm's own customer data. Now, this exposes sensitive customer data to potential breaches, misuse, or unintended biases. Now, bias is another significant risk in itself relative to the data that's used to drive AI systems. It's also referred to as machine learning bias or algorithm bias, and this can potentially result in groups of customers receiving poor outcomes, reflective of human biases within society. Now, with all of that said, there are ways to mitigate these risks that are associated with the use of AI, and building a robust and effective AI system requires investment both in terms of cost, but also in terms of the time taken to train and maintain that system to make it as effective as possible.
Thanks, Amit. If I can just mention another point there as well. I think one of the risks with AI is that if it does fail, if any of those risks crystallize, then you need to have a backup. And what is your backup? If you've used AI to remove certain functions of your business, replace certain individuals, what will you do if that disaster scenario occurs? So thinking through that, what other contingency plans you might put in place, third-party arrangements you might be able to utilise to mitigate that risk. It's definitely a complex area.
It would probably ultimately just fall back on us humans, Sarah, huh?
Eventually.
Yeah, of course. And I suppose that, and it's really important, I think, to be aware of them risks and pitfalls, like even before we even go into our next topic, because I think we're in the industry we're in, it's turned into somewhat of an AI arms race, where there's so many systems coming about, and so often kind of regulation follows. It's not usually there prior to it. So ensuring that we follow these best practices and have them in place prior to diving headfirst into it, I think is really, really important. So actually, it leads us nicely on to our final topic of the day, which is actually about kind of the use of AI and kind of using it to reduce risk or risk mitigation. But before we jump into that, I know we actually did have a poll running there as well. So a quick check-in on that before we actually run the final poll as well. So this poll was actually in relation to like finding out if businesses are actively exploring AI solutions, and I don't think it's any surprise to find that. Look, I think with the nature of the industries that we're in, it's something that we're going to have to kind of come to terms with eventually. So it's no surprise to see that here. The next poll is an interesting one though, and it touches on kind of what you had mentioned as well, and reducing kind of risk and risk mitigation and how we can potentially find a use case for AI in this space. And I suppose that's one thing that we're doing here in Scorebuddy at the moment. And I mentioned it earlier in that kind of the AI offering and where I see it really benefiting the FS space, especially with identifying vulnerable customers and identifying potential risky interactions, is analyzing the interactions that our agents and our customers have. So that's the core use case that we have for it here in Scorebuddy at the moment. Now we are using AI in other spaces, but this is a key area for us. Curtis, for yourselves in the savings group, I know we had a conversation before about how your plans for AI in the future and how it would help your kind of selection process for interactions. And can you talk to a little bit about your potential plans in this space, maybe?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mentioned earlier that the organization is a call-based organization. I've made that point many times through what we do internally. And while we're using Scorebuddy right now, and our QA process is heavily reliant on live humans to do that work, and that's how we want to keep it, there's other sections of the organization that I actually want to start to QA. So some of our top of funnel folks that I want to be able to QA, our BDR business development group, standard customer service group. There's an arm that on the very bottom of the funnel, which is our titles group, that finish up a lot of the title work and get all the titles perfected and sent out to their respective lenders. I want to be able to leverage long-term, and this is a plan for long-term, AI to do that, to start to develop our system and work within the confines of Scorebuddy to do that manually or that automatically through AI to leverage to build that out. The key piece of that is, how do we get there? What do we do to, how are we going to get that process? What do we need to do to get that process? So because our current CRM and Scorebuddy work in conjunction with each other, they're not integrated yet, and our call system is not integrated into either of those. We need those three pieces first to be able to talk to each other. So through API integrations and all of that information, those two pieces need to talk to, or three pieces need to talk together. Our LOS system, as an example, so where we're processing everything in our loan originating software, that does talk to Scorebuddy at this point, or I'm sorry, to our CRM at this point, and actually information moves between those two. Once I can get Scorebuddy integrated into that piece, and then on top of that have our call center platform integrate then into that as well, all branches can actually leverage information through our LOS and those systems. And then I'm going to be able to start to look at how I want to manage those calls from the top of funnel first, which is our BDR group, leveraging Scorebuddy AI to do that, to review those calls, flag any information that I need to. And then again, like we've done in the past with Scorebuddy and how we've leveraged it with our QA, be able to adjust and make process changes within that as well. And then long term, even further down the road from that, where it also integrates, our AI integrates into systems such as our chat and other places where I can utilize the Scorebuddy QA to make sure that information is also accurate, and where the AI is doing that look at it. That's my long-term goal, probably 12 to 18 months out from today.
That's awesome. And I suppose you kind of touched on all of them there, Curtis. There's obviously many different use cases we have, like one of which being the analyzing the interactions and help the risk mitigation. But the other use case that you alluded to there is obviously we can use AI to help score interactions as well. And it goes back to our previous point in kind of creating efficiencies in that space and lifting some of the workload off your QA team ultimately. So a couple of different use cases and potential uses for it. But again, to further Amit and Sarah's point that we talked to earlier, there are still some kind of pitfalls that we all need to be aware of when diving headfirst into the AI space. We had 40 minutes of kind of chat earmarked there, and we've covered all our topics. Does anyone have any questions for the speakers today, or in any particular topic that we've covered thus far? Larry, you're probably, I don't know if you can see any questions coming in, or
We see we have a question here. How do you feel about completing QA on customer-facing AI solutions? And that's from Lewis Parkinson.
Lewis, so how do we feel about completing QA on customer-facing AI solutions? So I suppose that actually alludes back to what we were talking to earlier, and there are ever-evolving AI use cases for analyzing the actual interactions themselves. Scorebuddy do have an offering now in this space. So I suppose, Curtis, I could put that question to you. If you could use AI to lift a lot of the workload off your QA agents, is it a potential use case to make your life a little bit easier?
Yeah, so it's a really good question, and I kind of just alluded to it a little bit. I want to be able to not really use AI to QA AI in itself, but definitely start to leverage that AI system to earmark situations that are coming up. So we're not digging in and finding everything. I want to be able to utilize AI on the top end of our funnel here in our business funnel, and then also throughout the entire process to essentially give us red flags, right? To say, hey, this needs to be looked into. There's certain pieces within our business, and I'm sure a lot of folks that are in financial understand that we can't go back to some of our vendors or some of our partners and say, we're using AI to do everything, or we're using AI to review calls in the event that there's any kind of regulatory concern. There has to be a person that's doing that. But there are parts of the business that actually we can leverage AI as business, as business owners or senior leaders within your specific business, to be able to look at certain parts and pieces of your business, grab that information and get that down so you have live information what's going on, and then you can coach, train, develop on that. And another piece, I just said it, like training is a huge thing. Like if you don't have the data that's coming in, up front. You want to be able to leverage some information to actually have your training and development team be involved on more ad hoc and live data versus post data. AI would be fantastic to use for that, to be able to pull key pieces out of information, flag certain calls, flag certain information to you. And Scorebuddy allows us to do that through the dashboard to see that information. So great question.
Yeah, awesome question. Lara, any yours?
We might have a question from Anne-Marie. She raised her hand earlier on. Well, if you'd like to put your question into the chat, Anne-Marie, and we can answer it there.
Yeah.
If you're still listening.
I suppose with no other questions, it looks like we have 15 minutes of everyone's time back. Listen, we covered a lot of content there and some really interesting points. And I really want to thank Sarah, Curtis, Amit, and Lara as well for hosting. Everything that was covered today, there's some really good takeaways that everyone can take, especially when dealing with vulnerable customers, and especially, Curtis, your unique insights into the kind of how you are doing QA in the savings group. It's crazy to think when you're looking at these topics from kind of the outset, it's like, where's the synergy here? But you can kind of almost see some synergies in every topic. But when Curtis is trying to ensure his QA structures in place and is evolving, but then equally the learnings that Sarah and Ahmed have told us about having vulnerable customer frameworks and things like that in place, and some of the potential pitfalls and risks of AI. So thank you so much, guys, for your insights and your time today, and thanks everyone else as well for listening.
Thanks for inviting us, Gavin. You did a great job today. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
guys.
Bye.
Best of
Bye.
luck.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.